Hello and welcome to this week's video on My Hero Academia. This week I will be reviewing the first episode of the second volume of Vigilantes. Now you know the rules and so do I. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought about this particular episode and you will be read out in next week's show. While you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today, it will do them a power of good. Now on to the review. And we start off as we often do with the positives, and just a little bit of an impromptu positive, because I'm just looking at my copy of the volume now. I have to say that I just really like the printed quality of this one versus the last one. The previous one, the paper quality was kind of crappy. It was that weird tan looking paperback book quality, whereas this one, it has more thicker white paper, so it makes the actual artwork pop out a little bit. It's not quite on the same quality as some of the Judge Dredd omnibuses that I've got, but hey, given the scale of everything, I'm perfectly fine with it. This whole manga, this whole edition of the thing, it looks fantastic for me. But anyway, on to the actual scripted positives, and we have to say that this is a perfectly fun, if a little bit of a curious episode, all things considered, with that opening sequence and those villains being pretty bloody unique, and probably the most unique villains we've had in the entire scope of My Hero Academia thus far. I won't lie, the scene that they're in is kind of entertaining, even if I don't like them, but more on that later. But boy, that was a hell of a way to kick off a volume, good God. God only knows how they're going to square that on some TV stations if it ever gets an anime. Though, to be fair though, things have changed and the target demographic for this whole series is far different to the kind of ones you usually get watching television these days. Because it would end up coming down to a question of, well, how do you censor that? Of course, I ask this question in jest, as I really don't think it would be, nor do I really think it should be, because let's face it, there are other televisions and movies shows that have done far worse than this, but just thinking about that whole idea and seeing this in action just gives me flashbacks of when anime just started to get shown in the West, and just the sheer backflipping that certain TV stations and producers had to do to censor certain things. And there's a part of me that wonders, how the hell would you censor this without just cutting it out completely? Would you just have a moment where they're going, oh, they're stealing people's newspapers? I don't know, I can't really criticise them for stealing people's newspapers, everyone has to be informed. Just that kind of thing, just how tenuous some of this stuff goes along, but still, it was a fun, if slightly baffling way to open a new volume. Like I say, when I'm looking at the physical volume itself, the quality of the actual print is far better. It looks and feels a lot more of a quality thing, and the artwork certainly pops a lot more on being on a more white paper than the usual tan one that the previous one was, but you know, I really didn't think that when I opened up this this volume for the first time, our opening villains would be a bunch of perverts stealing women's panties, but hey-ho, diddly-do, we move on to other things. One element that I did like about them was the fact that it did end up suggesting to us that quirks aren't unique. Villains can have the same quirk, well, people can have the same quirk as one another. Like the villains in this episode that start this out have the same quirk as our hero, which honestly I kind of find rather astounding. Sure, they might not be literally identical, certainly not on a genetic level, though to be fair, genetics and the way that quirks work just seem to be a bit of an anathema, particularly when you bear in mind the quirk doomsday theory and how that's all presented, but that's a rant for another day. But just the idea that these things can be that similar to one another, I just find kind of remarkable, because we don't really see that in the main series. Everyone that we meet has a distinct quirk to one another. There might be similarities, but usually they're not this identical, and I think that, to be honest, it does kind of change the way that I see quirks, to be honest with you. Maybe not to the extent that it radically recontextualizes what they are in the context of the wider story and this wider world, but all the same, it's definitely a neat idea that, well, I'm not sure I want to see it expanded upon, because, you know, I don't want to just get us into a period where here's a fire guy, here's another fire guy, here's another fire guy, because that would get too repetitive, and to be honest, there's enough repetitive stuff in Vigilantes enough as is. But again, that's a discussion for a whole other point. I have to say that there were some solid character interactions throughout this entire edition, this entire episode. I will admit that I don't think it was quite as solid as previous editions. I think the stuff with Crawler and Popstep, as I've said in previous episodes, was great. Seeing them trying to stop the goons was good. They make a good duo. They play off each other rather well. I just wish that we got to see more of them together like this. They didn't really do a whole lot. Pop Step just kind of feels like she's being pushed to the side a little bit too much for me. Granted that her role in all this seems to be pushed to the side, as the main focus for a lot of the character interactions thus far has been between Knuckle Duster and Crawler, and Knuckle Duster does feel, of all the characters in this episode, to one that gets a little bit more focus over Bee, but that's the way that it is. And for the record, again, I think that Knuckle Duster was fine in this episode, even if it does feel that he's a lot more understated in this one versus the previous one, which does make some sense because it feels as though he's preoccupied with this investigation into Bee. I get the sincere feeling that there is a connection here, that he's specifically investigating her because he knew that she was a Bee user. Regrettably, we didn't get the scene that I was hoping for this week where he explained how he knew that the person responsible for the stuff that happened in the last episode was a Bee user, apart from just seeing a bee with a weird abdomen, which itself is something that isn't even mentioned. And the fact that he is investigating Trigger, and the fact that this Bee user is using Trigger to use on people, it gives me the feeling that he's trying to investigate her, and there's some kind of connection between the two of them, that I'm sure that if there is or if there isn't, we'll probably find it out in the next few episodes or so. He is just generally out of sorts because of this investigation into Bee, and also him saying that he's not had a good fight in quite a while. I know that it's played for laughs here, because, you know, that's just how we've been shown him, how we've been exposed to him. We've been shown him as being a rather unsubtle brick of a man, this charging force, this unrelenting entity that just charges in and can just beat the crap out of whomever he comes across. And I just think that it's a distraction target. He's just saying, oh no guys, I just needed a good old fight to get rid of my frustrations. When in reality he seems to be a lot more wrapped up with the investigation into Bee, and the fight, yeah, it probably did do him some good to get rid of some frustration, but at the end of the day, that's where his main focus seems to be with a lot of all of this. No pun intended there. Again, it feels like he has more of a connection to her in some way, or at least he's been following them for some while, because she seems to be, aside from the salaryman, the main nexus point, the main administrator of Trigger that we see thus far. But again, we'll see about how this all really evolves from here. Beyond all that, I don't think the Knuckle Duster, much like Bee, or much like Pop Step, really had much of a presence within the episode. We do get a time period where we are looking at him, looking at his emotional state, but not to any great depth. Granted, we are still relatively early into the whole series, so the deeper dives into these characters and their backstories is probably something that we're going to get for another volume or two, but for the here and now, it just feels like he's just kind of there, much in the same way that Pop Step feels like she's much kind of there, and Crawler to a degree. It feels like we spend more time with those weird villains at the start and Bee, more so than we do with our main cast, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. Speaking of Bee, in this episode we learn that she isn't a solo flyer. She is almost constantly in communications with what seems to be her superior officers. She isn't a lone entity, or someone like Tomura, who, as we see in the early stages of My Hero Academia, was just kind of in the wind and was just seen to be working under their own power. Though with Tomura, it felt like the torch had been passed to him when he really wasn't ready for it, and as such he made a major hash of quite a lot of things in the early stages of that story until they decided they need some kind of big bad threat, and well, that's a discussion for a whole other time. Bee is shown here to be a smaller part in a larger machine. Her boss isn't keen on the fact she used Trigger in the last episode. I mean, I get being pissed off at the sheer amount of being used, because I don't imagine that it's a chemical that's easy to knock up. It's not something you could easily make through with a few household chemicals, but, you know, it did throw a hell of a wrench into law and order of the nation, and is a fantastic distraction, though that's only providing you actually have something to distract from. Which I'm guessing that they didn't, given the tone of the way the conversation was going. They seem to be interested in gathering data. They seem to be trying to get a better grasp on how to make and to better use Trigger, possibly to make it more permanent or just make it last longer. And I suppose that just having that sheer number of people undergoing Trigger in one go probably provides them with, well, realistically, too much data, or there's too much data to really be processed in one go. They can't really go, well, how does trigger work on just one specific quirk? As we see in this particular episode, we got the weird drug addict guy who just keeps swearing in almost every line that he's in. Another thing that'd be interesting to see exactly how they stage that if there's ever an anime. But, you know, they can easily gather data on just seeing how he reacts to it. It's harder to do when you got 6 or 7 people all turning at once, each one of them not really wanting to use their quirk to its fullest. But, you know, still I think that what we got with Bee was interesting. The weird dating stuff at the end of it, I really don't know how to feel about that, but hey, that's a whole other thing that I'm just not going to get into. What I am going to get into, however, is the negatives, and this might be one of the more controversial things I've said thus far, particularly when it comes to Vigilantes, but those opening villains, whilst they were humorous, they were just rather odd. Yeah, I get that they're supposed to be odd, they're supposed to be weird and creepy, but I will be honest, I feel that the behaviour is being played too much for laughs in my liking. I don't have issues with this kind of humour, this kind of risque humour. I really haven't, and a lot of shows that I've grown up watching, even though I was probably too young to watch them, did have humour like that. But usually when we have those kind of jokes, or at least as I've seen those jokes, they're handled in a very different way. Again, I don't have issue with these kind of jokes per se, but again, from my experience when these things come along, the subjects of the jokes, i.e. the people saying them, are either presented as utter losers and it's just funny that they think that life is like this, or they get their comeuppance almost as soon as a joke is said. A great example for this would be the BBC sitcom from the 1990s, Bottom, which I think is the best way to execute jokes like this. Our characters are losers. The joke is that when they make these rude and risque and lewd jokes, they are losers, and more often than not, they'll probably get whacked on the head or get their legs chopped off or something like that. Which we kind of end up getting in the end, but it's a bloody long way to get there. And it feels like a very specific niche of joke that I'm just not getting, because I just have a very weird attitude when it comes to jokes like this. And we have that weird moment where Crawler tries to reason with them, which itself could have been funny had they actually built on it more and leaned into that and made more something with that, but in the end they don't. It just feels like a one-panel gag, and in general, I have issues with this kind of joke. It feels weird to me because it brings up visions of, I think it's called Kinjet, Forbidden Subjects, which was one of the final movies that Charles Bronson made, which I thought was going to be a typical Charles Bronson shoots everyone movie, but it was a far more uncomfortable viewing experience. So whenever jokes like this come along, there's a part of me that goes, oh no, oh no, oh no, and this goes on a little bit too long for my liking. Aside from this, the only other criticism that I have are smaller issues, like at the very start of this volume there is a brief summary of who everyone is. Just a quick summary for anyone who's maybe waited a while to get these, is to reintroduce some of our characters and to explain who some of our characters are. But it introduces a character that won't come into the fold for seemingly another few episodes or so, called Stendhal, who, yes, they're on the cover, so you can't really call it a spoiler per se, but I think that this is a character that shouldn't have been revealed in quite such a way as this. I think they should have been saved for a little bit while longer. And there is this weird panel midway through. I think that there's actually 2 panels that kind of piss me off a little in this. One is that they do a flashback sequence in the background of one of the panels, but it looks like they've just taken a copy of the previous manga and just kind of compressed it into that, and it's really hard to make out what anything is, and it just kind of looks like a very cheap digital effect, which really undermines the quality of just everything else. Like I say at the start of this review, just the physical copy of this edition, this volume of the manga that I've got, is great. Again, not as good as certain other comic books and omnibuses that I have, but all the same, when you have something like that, where you suddenly get this rather inky, murky background thing that you're supposed to see and understand what it is, but you really can't, it's a bit of a downer. And the other panel is that there's a bit midway through the episode where it notes out that, Crawler knows about the whole thing with the Bee user because fake Wolverine told him to. And whilst the way that they present it is kind of cute, at the same time I don't feel as though it was really needed, because you could quite easily assume that he would find out about it from them anyway, so there isn't really a need to have the little thing saying he told him about it, because it feels to me like they were ready to print this out, they were ready to put it out, then they proofread it and said, oh wait, it's kind of not clear how he got to know about this. What do we do? Let's just add a little funny face and a thing that says he told him. Like, they could, like, if they'd have looked at this ahead of time, they could have had a little bit of an insert scene going where fake Wolverine is going, Knuckle Duster told me that there was a beer user, you see. That was really suspicious, and ever since then, he seems to be in a bit of a bad attitude, you see. And then Crawler could go on, does your current mood have anything to do with the bee user, as they do in the thing itself? But they don't. They just put a little bit of a thing in there, because I don't think they proofread the episode ahead of time. But, hey, I mean, it gets the point across for anybody that's confused. If there's any idiots in the audience who can't come to an honest and easy summation that, oh yeah, they probably talked between episodes, then, yeah, it's fine, but all they say, yeah. If anything, had they not put that in there, I wouldn't have noticed it. No, it feels like a bit of a plot hole. They pointed out the mistake, and there we go. It's hard to not see it. It's like when the first Star Wars movie, when the stormtrooper whacks his head on the door as he's walking in. You never notice that until someone points it out and says, oh, look at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Why, what's going to... Oh, wow, these left that in? Wow! And this is one of those moments for me, I think. I wouldn't have noticed it had I not known otherwise. But anyway, we're getting distracted now, so let us get into the overview. And I have to say that it was a fun episode for what it was. Yes, I wasn't really keen on the opening gag. I think that at the end of the day, beyond anything else, the issue that I have with it is it just kind of went on a little bit too long for my liking. Like, it feels like it should have been a quick in and out thing, and they were trying to milk as much comedy out of it as there was. And outside the shock value of it, I'll be honest, there's not a lot. And I think that, upon reflection, yeah, that's the thing I have more issue with more so than the subject matter. But even still, the subject matter does not rub well with me at all. But still, as a whole, I thought the episode itself was fine. It's a fine debut in this particular set of the volumes. I will admit that there is a part of me that is getting sick about the kind of format that some of these are taking, where it's our characters do a thing, have like character interactions, then someone takes trigger and goes crazy, then they beat them up, as that seems to have been the pattern we've been following. The pattern that we've been following for the past 4 or 5 issues right now, and I'm starting to get a little bit sick of it. But we'll see how all that goes in the future. As a whole entity, yeah, it's a fine way to open it out. We'll see how things go in the future. With all that said and done, let us get into Comment Corner. This week's comment comes from Big X1, who says, "Shame your next mangas didn't come along being enjoying them so far. Volume 1 is good, but it really hits its stride into 2. Thank you for your comment." And I have to say that, yeah, it was a disappointment that my mangas didn't arrive ahead of time. Like, I really wish I'd gotten into this last week, but that's just the way that things are. These things can get delayed by just about anything, and I'm happy that I got it. When I ordered it, it said that, oh, we've only got 3 copies of each left, and then order now. I can't pad this out any longer. What else am I going to do? Am I going to do a tier list of episodes from Volume 1? Am I going to do a tier list of all the villains mentioned in Volume 1? What would I have done had it not come in time? But it's here. I'm happy. I enjoyed the first one for the most part. I think the biggest issue I had was the fact that it just felt a little bit too repetitive. But hey, I'm looking forward to see how all these things go. I just want to say thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. If you have any comments about this particular issue of the manga, let me know in the comment section down below, and you will be read out in a future video. And for all of you between then and now, I say thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!